Welcome to Aging Gracefully. We want you to live and love life at any age and without regrets. And today I'm with my friend Joe Baker, audiologist at Hearing Science in Westlake, Ohio. And Joe, you're going to tell us why we need to get our hearing checked and how often, and if we need hearing aids, why we need to wear them, right?
Absolutely.
So let's do a little bit of background about your story here at Hearing Science.
To put it briefly, my experience in hearing healthcare started back in when I was still a teenager, technically.
Okay.
At 19, I joined the Army as an audiology technician. 4 years as an enlisted guy, doing hearing testing and working with soldiers to prevent hearing loss, so fitting hearing protection, doing annual hearing. When I got out, I went to work for an audiologist and then a couple other hearing practices, and ultimately ended up going to school to become an audiologist, which I did in 1999, and have always worked for somebody else until about a year and a half ago. The practice where I worked was sold to a competitor, and I decided to open up my own practice, of course mid-pandemic, but things actually are going really well. The community has been great. I had the mayor out a couple of weeks ago to welcome me to the community, so it's been a really positive experience so far.
And we love people who set big goals and do big things. So this is a great story. Yeah.
The successes I really appreciate the most are those that are more of a challenge in the beginning. I've had so many people come to me, and you can tell by how loud they're talking that they have hearing loss, and they're insistent, I'm fine, everybody else is mumbling. You know, their daughter or granddaughter's behind them saying, he's not fine. But you know, once you do the hearing test and you're able to explain how that hearing loss is affecting what they're able to pick up and how that's impacting their relationships with their family and their friends and people in their community, that really makes a difference. And then when they get their hearing aids for the first time, they're a little on edge and they're not sure, do I like this, do I not like this? I hear way too many things, but then they come back in a couple of weeks and then they say, can you turn it up a little bit? So, you know, those are the ones that I really appreciate. The people who, you know, maybe didn't think they had a problem or were in denial. And then they come back in a couple of weeks and they are, you know, then they can't live without it.
Hearing loss is more than an inconvenience for the family too, because hearing loss can really create other problems or be symptoms of other problems connected with other things. Can you tell me about that?
Sure. There are a lot of different conditions that are related to hearing loss. You know, so diabetes, heart condition, people who have balance issues might also notice that they have difficulty hearing. And then the biggie, and the one that's been in the news a lot more recently, is dementia or cognitive decline. So what we've suspected for a very long time and has been confirmed more recently with more research is that lack of auditory information. So when you start to lose your hearing, that lack of information getting up to your brain, it deprives your brain of a lot of stimulus, and that deprivation reduces your brain's ability to understand, especially speech, even if it's amplified. So once you get hearing aids, you know, if you've had hearing loss for a long period of time, you still are going to have this adaptation period while your brain adapts to that. But what's happening on a cognitive level is something a little more serious, and you know, that lack of stimulation leads to those neurons that decipher speech to either lay dormant or go to work for something else that's not their specialty. A lot of times they get recruited by the visual cortex to help people with their speech reading, because when you're not hearing, you're leaning in and watching people a lot more closely. But that's not what they were made to do, so they don't function that well, you know, when they're helping your vision. but they don't have anything else to do. So that's where they end up going a lot of times. But that lack of stimulation is what reduces the blood flow and the need for nutrient and oxygen-rich blood up into your brain, and that can help increase the rate of cognitive decline. So that's a biggie.
When you think about it, when you're having conversation with someone, you don't know what they're going to say next. It keeps you on your toes in a conversation. So if you're not hearing or pretending to hear and then not participating in the conversation, all that's being numbed down, isn't it?
Right, and we have the advantage as humans, we have language. So a lot of times our brains can fill in the blanks. So if we get 2/3 of a sentence and we know the individual, we know Patty is always going to talk about her grandson, and then Patty's talking about a grandson, we kind of know what she's going to say. But if it's a stranger, or maybe at your doctor's office, and you don't know the or you maybe only know the context, you don't necessarily know all of the words that they're going to say, or maybe they're talking about a new medication, something, we don't get all of that information, and it's harder to interpret and for our language skills to fill in the blanks. And that can lead to difficulties with your health, difficulties with your relationships.
Right. Frustration for family members and friends.
Well, and one tip for family members for somebody with hearing loss is if somebody has said, I didn't hear you, what did you say? Try rephrasing your sentence. If you say the same sentence word for word, then that's the sentence that we already know the person with hearing loss has difficulty hearing. So if you change the sentence a little bit, use a couple different words, that might actually click. It will make things come through a little clearer for a lot of people.
So we want people to get their hearing checked. We want them to have hearing screens. You call them audiograms, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So let's get a little bit of details, like how often should this be, or is it after a certain age? Tell me a little bit more about an audiogram.
Sure. The frequency will depend on what happens with your baseline hearing test, the first one that you get. There are different ages where we recommend getting your hearing checked, especially your baseline. I think the smartest one is to get your first hearing test around age 50. That way you know where you are, and you shouldn't have any serious deficit in your hearing, but you might. A lot of people realize in their 40s that they've developed some hearing loss from different things. But if your hearing is great at 50, if your hearing is fine, then we can put it off your next test for another 5 or 10 years unless you notice a change. Then once you get to 60, you might want to start doing it every couple of years, just as to keep an eye on things and make sure it's stable. If your hearing loss is stable, then great, but if it is getting a little bit worse year after year, then and you know when to take action. Your audiologist is going to tell you, you've been fine, but if it gets any worse, I think we need to talk about hearing aids. When you lose hearing as a result of aging, the medical term for that is presbycusis, but that's just a fancy way of saying age-related hearing loss. Most often you lose the high-pitched sounds first, the higher frequencies. Those are the sounds that are consonant sounds in speech. So distinguishing between a TH and a PH sound gets very difficult, and all of those sounds that are made by air passing over your, through your lips and your teeth get harder to distinguish, especially if you don't see the person's face, because then you can't see if they're
Like you're on the phone
Right.
and
Right, or they're wearing a mask, or they're facing away from you.
like the past year had to be really challenging for people.
Many people came in who said, I thought I heard fine until we started wearing masks. But yes, so it does get more difficult to get those consonant sounds, so people do get words mixed up more often, or the perception is that others are mumbling. You hear the vowel sounds just fine, and you hear the voiced consonants like B and M and D. Those come through a little more clearly than a C or an S. You know, that sound is difficult to pick up with a high frequency hearing loss.
And then we talked about that example where a doctor might say discontinue, but the patient might hear just continue.
Right.
Something so simple that can end up life-threatening. So then, Joe, since we always talk about living life without regrets, what would be the one most important thing you would say to the audience to make sure they have no regrets in regards to hearing?
So once you have that baseline hearing test, or any hearing test, if the recommendation is to move forward with hearing aids, I would not delay. The reason is your hearing is not going to get any better. The longer you wait to get hearing aids, the more difficult it will be for the adjustment to occur, for that neural rewiring, for your brain to adapt to hearing with hearing aids. You just don't want to miss those moments, and you don't want your grandchild to say or think to themselves, Grandma or Grandpa doesn't think I'm important enough to hear me or pay attention to what I'm saying.
Or a child might even grow up thinking that it's not fun talking to Grandma or Grandpa because they don't answer back.
Right.
Right. So a great way to avoid the regrets of missing out on all this fun and enjoyment of family and grandchildren.
Right. Yeah, or the embarrassment of answering incorrectly when the grandchild asks you a question.
Right. Okay. So maybe we already did some damage, or maybe our hearing is in good shape. But what are those things, everyday activities that could actually be creating a problem for us? How about like the lawnmower?
Yeah, so the big thing most people think about, of course, is noise, because we are bombarded with noise in so many different areas of our life, whether it is, recreationally with, loud music, going to concert or, other event venues. And then occupational, you have very loud machinery that, people who work in manufacturing are dealing with, that type of situation where they can't control the noise. They can't leave. They're stuck there for 8 hours. And then there's also, military. I see a lot of veterans here who have significant noise exposure from weapons firing, from working in an engine room on a destroyer out in the middle of the Atlantic, or, what have you. There's so many different opportunities for noise to cause damage to your ears. One way to help protect yourself, of course, is with earplugs or earmuffs. So if you're using lawn equipment at home or other power tools, it's a good idea to get a pair of earmuffs. Just put them over your ears, do what you need to do, get it over with, and then you've protected your ears. If you do damage to your hearing, you might first notice some ringing in your ears. We call tinnitus.
Oh, I'm familiar with that.
So if you have had tinnitus or ringing after some loud noise exposure, that is an indication that you have done some damage to your inner ear. So that is, one way that you know. A way to prevent that, of course, with hearing protection or removing yourself from a situation is, say you are trying to talk to somebody and they're about an arm's length away, maybe 3 feet. If you have to shout or they need to shout for you to hear each other, then it's too loud. at that point, it's time to put in some hearing protection or move away from the noise source. Other things that can cause or contribute to hearing loss, though, we don't often think of, but diabetes or other conditions that affect your blood flow reduces the amount of blood that gets to your inner ear, which can increase the rate of hearing loss for individuals.
I didn't know that. I would have never known that. So can I just tell my audience? So one more reason to eat less sugar.
Yes. Eat less sugar, less fat. Anything that's going to affect the quality of your blood. Anything that affects the oxygen level or the nutrient levels in your blood. So, diabetes, smoking.
So there's another thing. Quit smoking so that you can hear better. I love it.
Right. So, so those things we do to ourselves and contribute to hearing loss. But there are other things that we have less control over, like what we call ototoxic chemicals or medications. So things in the environment. If you're in a healthier air quality environment, you don't have quite as much to worry about. But if you're in a place where there are more air quality issues, whether that's from secondhand smoke or from nearby manufacturing facilities, those are things to be concerned about as well. But then there are people who are being treated for certain illnesses or chemotherapy. Those medications and some of the very powerful antibiotics can also cause hearing loss. Sometimes that happens in one ear suddenly, or it'll happen in both ears simultaneously, depending on how it got into your bloodstream.
So there is so much more involved than I would have ever thought. So that many more reasons, really. Just come in and get it checked and be able to speak to the audiologist like you and be able to share these concerns. And do you probably go through a questionnaire at the beginning of these kinds of things?
Yes. So we'll get a pretty comprehensive history of your noise exposure, chemical exposures, medications, family history, all of that to help us determine, what might be behind a hearing loss if you are found to have hearing loss. That's very important and something that you can't do that at home, or your doctor isn't going to do that if he might ask about family history. But even the doctors typically defer to the audiologist.
So thank you, Joe Baker, for being with us today and giving us great information about protecting our hearing, the suggestion to get our hearing checked, to wear the hearing aids if they're recommended. So appreciate this. I would love for the audience to give you a call and to check out your beautiful office here in Westlake, Ohio, Hearing Science. Thank you again. And I always ask one question before I leave.
Okay.
What is the secret to aging gracefully?
To me, aging gracefully means that you stay fully engaged in your relationships, whether that is with your partner, with your family, your community. That's how you stay fully engaged. And that's really, I think, what keeps us happy, keeps us motivated every day, and keeps those around us excited to be with us and spend time with us.
Great answer. Thank you.
Thank you.